So, well, I've already started with a mistake. I copied this from a previous message and edited it, but back then I hadn't gone to the trick of going to a 14 point font yet, so it's a little hard to read. Anyway, and you may wonder, well, why didn't you just do the whole thing in that font? Well, the reason is I had already shrunken down a lot of it, and I'd have to go back and redo that if I did the whole font. So anyway, neither here nor there. So when I was 15 and 16, I lived in Puerto Rico. And so I went to an all English school, U.S. government school, but, 80% of the kids were bilingual, if not more. And so I learned Spanish pretty good, not as good as you might think, but pretty well. And, but, over the years, I lost it, couldn't speak it at all hardly. And so my parents moved back to Puerto Rico in about 2000, more or less. And in 2003, they paid for us to come down. And so to get ready for that, I started reading in Spanish. I thought, well, maybe this will get me back. And so, so I'm going to just take a quick time out and tell a small anecdote while we were down there. So we went to a little tourist area, and it was a cave. It was pretty cool, but there was no parking. So they had it where you had to ride a tram up there to get to the staging area and then ride another tram to get down. And so when we're leaving, I'm in a hurry. We're hoping to get out before I forgot what appointment we had. So we're standing there waiting. We'd been let off this tram and we're waiting for the next one. Well, just as ours take us down the mountain got there, the other one came, and people started getting off that one and filling up all the spots on our tram, and we'd been waiting at least 15 minutes or so. And so I was, informed, okay, you guys got to go to the back of the line. Hey, well, nobody altered anything they were doing. So I thought, well, maybe they don't know English. So I said it in Spanish. And I guess that took effect, and enough of us got on the tram that we got to get out. But because it's so crowded, me and Angie didn't get to sit together. So she sat in the back car, and I sat in the front car. And there could have been more than that. But anyway, so I'm sitting all proud of myself. I communicated something in Spanish. And even though these tourists appeared to be from Japan, I don't know why I felt that way. But anyway, but Angie was sitting in the back listening to some other people, and she overheard two women saying to each other, "Did you hear that man trying to talk in Spanish?" And Angie was busting the gut to tell me that when we got off. Yeah, so that knocked me down a peg or two, and maybe it was just seeing a wild-eyed guy. They figured, oh, we got I don't know. But anyway, it worked. But so anyway, so I would get a book in English and in Spanish. It didn't take a long time, Spanish dictionary, and go through it. And I've gone through at least 20 books that way, I'd say, maybe more. That's been nearly 20 years, but I hadn't done it in a few years, other than the Bible. And one of the other things I did is I have a Bible that has English on one side of the page and Spanish on the other. So it's kind of a good 2-for-1. You can read the Bible and learn some Spanish while you're at it. But how does that relate to a message, right? So you've heard the phrase, something is lost in translation. Well, me reading two translations side by side of all kinds of books in the Bible, I see how true that really is. There's plenty of times when they don't match up nearly as close as you might think. And so I was going to mention some of those things and then come up with some examples from the biblical languages to English that are kind of the same thing. because languages have these same features between each other. And so one of the problems is that many words have more than one meaning. So which word you use to translate? Oftentimes, these different synonyms have subtle differences, and or the whole phrase is slightly different. And so I think a good example for this that makes it difficult to know what the original author meant to now is a famous word every one of us knows from Greek, and that's logos. I doubt there's anybody here that hadn't heard, knows that the word logos is translated word, especially in it's in a few places, but especially John 1, 1, where it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Well, the problem is the word doesn't come even close to doing all the nuances and subtleties of the word logos. So according to logos.com, in a section called the Greek background of logos, etymology, and origins, it says, logos eventually came to communicate the idea of, now this is what the Greeks, this was not related to the Bible, this part, what the Greeks called giving an account in the sense of explaining a story. Having been identified with language, logos came to mean that all language involves both the act of sharing information and the thought that produces language. And then it goes on to say, this wide range of meanings for logos made a difficult term to translate and comprehend. So, but one thing I thought was a little bit interesting, all of the English translations use the word. I mean, Bible Gateway, you can see them. I think all of them said word, which is unusual for there to be that much agreement. One thing I think very interesting about Spanish is the version I had, and a lot of them use the word verb instead of the word. And so it reads, in the beginning was the verb, and the verb was with God, and the verb was God. And that's a pretty significant difference. But if you think about it, verb is a word. It's just a more specific type of word. Now, I don't think verb is a more accurate translation. I just think it's kind of interesting. And there are some Spanish versions that use the word palabra, which is the word for word. I mean, I'm saying the word a bunch. So, in this verse, there is another subtlety that I thought I'd mention. So I was looking that verse up in an interlinear Bible. I think it's scripturesforall.org. And so the two words for God in that verse are not exactly the same word. The first one, and they're almost the same, so don't get too crazy here. But the first one is theos, theon, and the second one is theos. The first one is masculine, and the second, wait a second, no, I don't know about that part. I think they're both masculine, they have a gender. But the first one is a direct object, and the second one is a subject. And so they're pretty much the same. I mean, it's almost the same. It's just a flavor of speech that it is. But in the, if you look at how it's literally placed in the interlinear in the Greek, that second phrase that says the word was God, well, since God is the subject in that little phrase, it says God was the word. Essentially the same. I mean, I'm not changing doctrine here or anything, but it's a little bit interesting. And so that matches, in my opinion, the actual Greek. So from that standpoint, I feel like that's the right translation. From another standpoint, that all 50 or more translations I checked say it the other way, I must be wrong, because that all of those experts would have it wrong or something. I just feel like. So I'm not going to hang my hat too much on that, but I'm definitely missing something why they think it's supposed to be the other way. But like I say, it's not a salvation issue, as you might say. All right, so another difficulty in translation is there are words that are implied in one language and not in the other. And the most frequent one that actually has a doctrinal relevance is the word he used for the Holy Spirit. Most of the places where he is used in English, it's just simply not there at all in the Greek, because their verbs, as Spanish, have the pronoun a lot more conjugation of the verbs, so their pronouns go with their verbs. And in Spanish especially, they don't use a pronoun a lot. Like I noticed, I've been trying to study French lately, and it's the same kind of deal. But they use their pronouns more than Spanish does. Seems like. But well, let's see. So, so the example I have is Hebrews 10:15. And in English it says, but the Holy Spirit also witnesses to us, for after he had said before, and then, the rest of the verse. In Greek, there's not a separate word for he, and Spanish is the same way. It doesn't have a separate word for he. And, Spanish and Greek do have the words for that. They just didn't include it in the Greek. The other difficulty in translations is the structure of languages is radically different. In Greek, and the Bible especially, is just completely different sentence structure than what we're used to in English. And so I'll just do that last verse from Hebrews in what was the interlinear. And so instead of, but the Holy Spirit also witnesses to us, for after he had said before, it says, is witnessing yet to us, and the Spirit, the Holy, after for the, and then a single word, to have before declared. So it is, I really can't use the interlinear for too much because it's too confusing. But sometimes you can, like, okay, in this whole verse, there is no word for this. Well, okay, we can see that was done. You can use logic, but you really would need a few courses in Greek to really be able to handle that appropriately, which I wouldn't mind doing, really, but that's several reasons I haven't done that. But so punctuation is different. That's another, of course, and I'll just read this. I mean, it's common knowledge, but I'll read what blueletterbible.org has to say about it. The ancient Greek and Hebrew manuscripts had little, if any, punctuation. In fact, there was no, and this is the part I didn't realize, there was no systematic use of punctuation marks until the 8th or 9th century. So that's way up into Latin times. Greek wasn't the main language even by then. So I thought that was interesting. So the modern translations have, obviously, you got to have punctuation to have correct English, Spanish, any other language that's modern. So, and of course, the famous example where it really makes a difference is Luke 23:43, where Jesus says, truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise, is how it's usually written. Of course, since there's no comma, it could have been, really should have been maybe, truly I say to you today, you will be with me in paradise. To me, I personally don't see a whole lot of difference, because even if it was before, it could have mean today you're as good as in paradise. I mean, so I don't know. But that it's hard to say because there's no information whatsoever. I mean, zero information in the Greek on where to put that. So another difficulty in translations is sometimes the word does not exist at all in other language. So then you have to do something, either pick a word that's close or put a whole explanation or something. So in Spanish, the word that just pops into my mind is the word, and I think it'd be cool if we had this word, but is estadounidense. And so the word for United States is Estados Unidos. Probably a lot of people know that. So estadounidense, if you translated it, if we had such a word, would be United Statesian. But like Czechoslovakian and that stuff, Mexican, we don't have a word that means that. And to most of the world, they say American, which is fairly inaccurate considering there's probably 45 countries in the Americas. I could look that up. I didn't think to do that. But so in these Spanish books I'm reading, a lot of them targeted for Central and South America, they don't use the word American to refer to a U.S. citizen. I think the most of the time I remember they say North American, Norte Americano, which again is a little inaccurate because there's 3 countries in North America. Although I find it interesting, I think Canadians do refer to U.S. citizens as Americans. I don't know what Mexicans do. I think they probably say North. Well, they won't say North American. They may say Estadounidense. I don't really know. I couldn't find it. I looked for that one. I couldn't find it. Or they use Estadounidense. I've seen that. And so an example in the Bible, though, a little more relevant, I guess you could say, is, and I found this at that same website, is the word, and I'm going to just spell it. I'll say it in a minute, but Chiton, C-H-I-T-O-N, or Chiton, I'm not sure. And it's Strong's 5509. And it does not have an equivalent word in English. And what it is, it's a long undergarment worn next to the skin and covered the person from neck to the feet. And it's used in the New Testament 11 times, and it's translated as clothes, coats, garment, shirt, tunic, and tunics. And tunic and tunics is the main one it is. So in Luke 6:29 it says, if someone slaps you on one cheek, turn to them the other also. If someone takes your coat, do not withhold your shirt from them. Now, I'll point out that first word, coat, we also don't know exactly what that means. Because if you go with the NIV, which that is, they say coat and shirt. The New King James and New American Standard say cloak and tunic. And the King James says cloak and coat. Well, if you substitute undergarment for shirt, it kind of puts a new spin on it. Whoever takes away your coat or cloak, do not withhold your undergarment from him. So that puts a whole new spin. You're left nude when you do that. So to me, that's a case where it kind of makes it more of an interesting verse. It's already interesting because it's like, if you slap, that verse already gets some consideration. Okay, am I really supposed to let somebody just slap me on the other cheek and that kind of stuff? But anyway, I thought that was an interesting little thing there. So figures of speech is another thing between languages. They're different. For example, in English, you say break a leg. Well, you don't translate rompe tu pierna in any language, right? They would translate that good luck or something completely. But so when it gets translated back, it gets translated to good luck. So, you translate something and translate it back, it's not going to be the same. So the example I found in the Bible for this is Revelation 22:14. And that is, blessed are those who wash their robes, that they may have the right to the tree of life and may go through the gates into the city. Now, we kind of have a decent idea what that means, but the New King James says, blessed are those who do his commandments, that they may have the right. So, now this isn't an example of where they're translating it different. It's an example where the source is different that's getting translated from. But I have a feeling that those sources diverged, maybe because somebody washed their robes and said, okay, I'm going to put what it means to me when they're going. But those two phrases diverge from the original Greek, so we don't know which one it is. My gut feeling is that wash their robes was, because that's the more unusual. But I don't know. That may have been such a common phrase that it went from keep the commandments to wash the robes. But anyway, I found that one there. And so another example of a figure of speech is 1 Peter 1:13. It says, wherefore, gird up the loins of your mind, be sober, and hope to the end for the grace that is brought to you as the revelation of Jesus Christ. So now here's a phrase, we don't know exactly what he's talking about, but you get the gist. So it's not like wash your robes. Really, to me, that conceals the meaning. I don't really know what they're talking about there. But this one, so I found on improvingyourenglish.com, says, in biblical times, people wore long tunics. And before doing any significant activity, I guess back in like the 40s, women would maybe top their skirt a little bit. I don't know when you had long, if it went to your ankle. But they would, if you're going to be doing a lot of hard work, if this thing's going down to your ankle, you got to wrap it up. And so I don't know if it's referring to just the chiton that's talking about or the whole, top and bottom layer. But you put it up in your belt, in your loin area, and that's what gird of your loins means. So in that case, you still get the picture. So it's no harm in the information, but you don't get as rich because we haven't seen people doing that, because here we wear pants and no girding necessary. So a thing that's a little, so those type of idioms are usually easy to understand. And one that comes to mind is in Spanish. We say in English, money doesn't grow on trees. Well, in Spanish, you say, el dinero no cae del cielo, which means money does not fall from the sky. Which we don't say it that way, but it's very easy to know what they're talking about. Well, the other thing that's less easy to know what they're talking about are common idioms, and we have so many that it doesn't literally mean what the thing, you really just don't even notice them. But just to pick one out, for example, thank you, which could be an idiom all by itself, but thank you in English is de nada in Spanish, which means of nothing. And we do say, oh, it's nothing, but you wouldn't ever just say of nothing. So that's a common idiom that you translate. You don't translate it literally, and they don't, I guess you could translate thank you, but it wouldn't mean the same if you did. So an example of that is in the English Standard Version of 2 Corinthians 6:11. 2 Corinthians 6:11, it says, we have spoken freely to you, Corinthians. Our heart is wide open. So they have a note in those Bibles that say, and I think this one too, but we have spoken freely to you is literally our mouth is open to you. So that if it just said our mouth is open to you, it doesn't. You could definitely be confused about what it means. Although you might guess it means you're speaking frankly, but now, so the New King James says we have spoken openly to you. So they at least get the word open in there. Our heart is wide open. So since it says that, you may think the original is contrasting, and this is what I thought at first. I said, oh, that's cool. It's contrasting your open mouth with an open heart. And that is not what it does, because I looked it up, and the open heart is it's not a literal translation. Literally, it is heart has been broadened. And the King James here is actually more literal. It says, O ye Corinthians, our mouth is open to you, our heart is enlarged. So there was no play on words or any other semantic meaning between open and open there. So another thing that makes it difficult, that's not translatable, and the one thing I cannot understand to this day, even reading it, I have a hard time, and that's jokes or plays on words. I don't know of an example from the Bible of an actual joke, but I do have an example of a play on words. And so it is Matthew 16:18. And this is where Jesus says, and I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not overcome it. Well, so most everybody here knows that Peter, the word for Peter is literally rock. It's kind of like Rock Hudson. The word Rock Hudson and Rock Hudson means also the word rock. Well, Peter, the word for Peter back then was the word rock. It's like saying rock. But it was a name. And the second word is a different word in the Greek. And it was, so here's where I was getting mixed up. So the word for Peter, that's the name, is the masculine gender. The word for rock, that's second, is Petra, which means is a feminine gender. And it's not used as a name. So he's using two different words. So he's not saying he's building his church on Peter. He's building his church on Petra. And according to trustinggodamerica.com, the word Petra, even though it's feminine, you might think this is the opposite. It actually has a connotation of being more solid, like a big cliff or something like that. A more stable, solid rock surface. Let's see where I'm at here. Another, and I don't have examples, but another thing that's hard to translate, if it's supposed to rhyme or some other thing like that, have to have a certain number of syllables. Of course, those for sure don't translate unless you just, coincidence. Now, another one that does affect on the Bible is they do not have the same types of pronouns. For example, in English, we really don't have a difference between the singular, well, I shouldn't say really, we do not have the difference between singular you and plural you. Now, in the South, we say you all, and, other parts of the country too, but that's not exactly the same thing. In Spanish and in Greek, they have a plural you and a singular you. And I'll mention the regular King James also has that difference. Ye is plural and thou is singular. But where this makes a little bit of difference in understanding the scripture is in Mark 14, 37 and 38. And so this is in the Garden of Gethsemane, and Jesus is saying this. And he came and found them sleeping and said to Peter, Simon, are you sleeping? Could you not watch 1 hour? Watch and pray, lest you enter into temptation. The spirit's willing, but the flesh is weak. So the you, when he's talking to Peter, that one's singular. But when it says watch and pray, those are plural. So he's talking to more than just Peter. I feel like maybe he's saying that to population in general, watch and pray, but maybe he was talking to the group of men there. You can't tell, but it is not just Peter to watch and pray, it's more than one. And that's where the Spanish and Greek agree with each other on that one. You can tell, and the King James, you can look in there and see the difference in the plurality of that. A little minor point, it doesn't help, that much, but it's nice to know those connotations sometimes. And so, skipping that part, because that's King James. So the other thing that's different between languages can be the gender, and I mentioned that already. We have a lot of languages, Greek and Spanish included, have gender of nouns. And so you literally cannot tell the difference between the word he and the word it, or the word she and the word it. Uh, although in Greek it does have a neuter, and so I don't know how that fits in. Spanish does not have that. Um, so, example of that is in John 14:17. John 14:17 says, "The Spirit of truth, whom the world cannot receive, because it neither sees him nor knows him, but you know him, for he dwells with you and will be in you." So in the Spanish, so here's where Spanish doesn't match the Greek, even though they have a similar thing here. In Spanish, the he is implied in the verb. But in the Greek, it does have a word for he in there. But according to that interlinear source I look at, that particular gender is neuter. And I found it a little bit interesting. Believe it's the King James actually does translate it to it in that particular case. But most, I think the English translations say he in that case. So I'll finish with one specific example in Spanish. So you're going along in the Spanish, and I'm not that great at Spanish, but so I'm like, okay, looking over there, and I can't match it up to the English and go, so that phrase is de asno, which is of ass or a donkey, is the little phrase that's in the Spanish but not in English. So that's simple enough of a phrase. It's like, okay, I should be able to, what am I missing here? But it goes, Matthew 18:6. "But whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him if a millstone were hung around his neck and he were drowned in the depths of the sea." Well, and I'll go ahead and tell you that Greek matches the Spanish in this case. So the Spanish is actually more accurate in this one example. The Spanish says, so piedras is rock. "Una piedra de molino de asno." In other words, a millstone of an ass hung around his neck. So what that implies to me is the size of it. It's not a human-held millstone. We're talking about a big millstone that takes a animal burden to do it. And so I think that kind of helps that understanding of that verse a little bit. So, but I don't want to leave you with too negative of an impression. Yeah, there's a lot of trouble in doing the translations. That's why these experts have got so many different opinions on it. But I do think God gives us enough tools and guides us with His Spirit that we can get, at least a lot of the time, hopefully most, the meaning of what He really wants to understand. And we do have nowadays, compared to, let's say, 150 years ago, when all you had was the King James and maybe Strong's Concordance, we have a lot of resources. So, and it takes a lot of effort to go through them, but we can nail down some of these differences.